California Wildfire Live, 6 fires burning in Los Angeles County. It was a warm summer morning in Los Angeles County, the kind of morning that promised another dry and sweltering day. The city was waking up, the traffic buzzing through the streets, and people going about their routines. But beneath the usual hustle, a different kind of energy was beginning to pulse through the air, a kind of urgency, a gnawing sense of unease. The first reports came in around 7 a.m., when a small fire had been spotted in the hills just east of Pasadena. The winds had been picking up overnight, and the dry conditions, combined with the heat, created the perfect storm for a blaze. Local news stations immediately began broadcasting live updates, with helicopters circling overhead and the smell of smoke slowly drifting across the city. As the morning wore on, more fires were reported, each one flaring up in different parts of Los Angeles County. By noon, 6 fires were officially burning out of control. The largest of these was in the Angeles National Forest, where thousands of acres of dry brush and trees were rapidly consumed by the flames. Evacuations were ordered in nearby neighborhoods, and the fire department was stretched thin, calling for reinforcements from other counties and even other states. The news anchor on the live broadcast, her voice steady but filled with an underlying tension, relayed the latest information as it came in. At least 6 fires are now burning across Los Angeles County. Authorities are urging residents to stay indoors, and if you live in an evacuation zone, please leave immediately. The winds are expected to pick up this afternoon, which could make the fires even more unpredictable. On the ground, fire crews worked tirelessly, their faces grim but determined. The smoke was thick, and the heat oppressive, but there was no time to lose. The fire didn't care about the limits of a controlled burn or fire breaks. It was moving fast, sweeping across the hillsides and moving toward populated areas. In one of the evacuation zones, Mia Hernandez stood in her front yard, her eyes glued to the television as the live feed showed plumes of smoke rising from the hills just miles away. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down at a text from her sister, Maria, who was already on her way to a nearby shelter with her 2 kids. "Are you coming?" the text read. Mia hesitated for a moment, glancing at her home, her life, everything she had worked for. The smell of smoke was getting stronger, and the air felt heavier. She couldn't risk it. With a quick exhale, Mia grabbed her bag and ran to her car. There wasn't time to waste. By the time she reached the evacuation center, the streets were packed with cars, many of them covered in ash. The fire was spreading quickly, and the smoke had begun to obscure the skyline. As she pulled into the parking lot, Mia could hear the crackling of the fire in the distance, an ominous sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Inside the shelter, Maria and the kids were sitting on folding chairs, waiting in silence. Mia dropped her bag beside them, taking a seat. "It's getting closer," Mia said, her voice low. "I know," Maria replied, looking at her with a mix of fear and calm, "but we're safe here, that's what matters." But safety felt like a fragile thing. The fires had been relentless all day, and with the high winds continuing to fan the flames, it was impossible to know how much longer their home, or anyone's home, would remain safe. As the hours passed, the fires raged on, and the live broadcasts continued, showing the flames lighting up the night sky. The camera zoomed in on firefighters working in pairs, trying to create a fire break while others did their best to save homes that stood in the path of destruction. The wind howled through the trees, sending ash fluttering through the air like confetti. The fire crews were moving fast, racing against time, but there was little they could do against nature's fury. At the shelter, Mia could only watch the news, praying that her home would be spared. The flames that had begun as small, contained fires had now become a powerful force, unpredictable, unstoppable. By morning, 6 fires had merged into one massive blaze, swallowing everything in its path. The sky had turned a dark, smoky orange, and the heat was suffocating. Thousands of people had been displaced, but as the fire burned, the community began to come together. Neighbors checked on each other, local businesses donated supplies, and volunteers offered their help. In the face of the unthinkable, there was something even more powerful than the fire: human resilience. The battle wasn't over, but for now, the people of Los Angeles County stood together, watching the wildfire unfold, but never giving up hope. And in the months to come, they would rebuild. The sun had barely risen the following day, and the wind still carried the acrid scent of charred earth. The evacuation shelters were filling up, but many were emptying out as people began to return to check on their homes. Some were met with the harsh reality of nothing left but ashes, while others were cautiously optimistic, finding their houses still standing but surrounded by the blackened remnants of nature's wrath. Mia and Maria had stayed at the shelter overnight, the kids curled up on cots, their faces pale from exhaustion but free of the terror that had gripped them when the fire had seemed too close. Mia woke early, her phone buzzing with notifications. There were updates on the fire's progress, and her heart raced as she scrolled through the alerts. The fire had now spread across more than 20,000 acres of land, and it was still far from under control. With temperatures rising and no rain in sight, authorities were bracing for a prolonged battle. The governor had declared a state of emergency, and the National Guard had been deployed to help with evacuations and aid efforts. "Do you think our house is gone?" Maria asked quietly, her eyes heavy from lack of sleep. She hadn't been able to stop worrying about her husband, Victor, who was still in their home on the outskirts of the city, refusing to leave until the last possible moment. Mia looked at her sister, at the worry in her eyes, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. The uncertainty was worse than the actual danger, the waiting and wondering if everything you had worked for was about to be reduced to nothing. "We don't know yet," Mia said, her voice steady, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. "We'll know when the evacuation orders lift. For now, we just have to wait." They spent the morning checking in with other family members and friends, each person sharing their own story of the fire's devastation. Some were lucky enough to be far enough from the flames, while others were still in limbo, unable to return home or unsure if their houses would even be there when they did. By noon, a local news station began broadcasting live from the foothills of the Angeles National Forest, showing the incredible size of the fire. Flames leapt high into the air, consuming trees and brush, while firefighters in orange gear moved with precision, trying to save what they could. The fire had jumped over several fire breaks overnight, making it nearly impossible to contain. The camera panned over a neighborhood that had been evacuated the night before. The houses were still standing, but smoke poured out of windows, and embers floated in the air like a surreal rain. The fire had come dangerously close, and residents who had returned in the morning were now being told to leave again. Mia's heart sank as she recognized a street she had driven down 100 times in her life. She held her breath, hoping that somehow, the fire would be contained before it reached the homes of people she knew. "I think it's time we go check on Victor," Mia said finally, standing up. Maria nodded silently, and they both grabbed their bags. The shelter staff had advised everyone to remain in place, but Mia's gut told her that they couldn't wait any longer. As they made their way back toward their car, the thick haze from the fire hung low in the air, and the streets were eerily quiet. The usual bustle of Los Angeles seemed to have evaporated into the smoky haze. It felt like an apocalyptic scene, as if the world had momentarily paused in the face of the relentless flames. When they reached the outskirts of the city, the fire was even closer than they had anticipated. The sky was an orange-tinged mess of smoke and ash, and the hillsides that Mia once thought of as serene were now lit with angry flames. The power lines were down in several places, and street lights flickered in the heavy smoke. They arrived at Victor's house, unsure of what they would find. The place had been untouched the night before, but now the fire seemed far too close for comfort. A crowd of neighbors had gathered, most of them looking anxiously at the towering inferno, unsure if they should leave or hold out hope that the fire would pass. Victor appeared at the door, a grim smile on his face as he saw them approach. "I didn't want to leave," he said, shrugging, "but I think it's time. It's getting too close." Behind him, the house was filled with the faint smell of smoke, and through the windows, Mia could see the flames licking the edges of the hills just a few miles away. The fire had advanced rapidly overnight, and the winds were pushing it in their direction. "It's not safe," Mia said firmly, putting a hand on her brother-in-law's arm. "We need to go, now." The decision was made quickly. They packed what little they could fit into the car, important documents, a few mementos, and left the house behind. The road out of the area was now clogged with other residents who had decided to leave, and emergency crews were directing traffic to safer routes. Mia looked back as they drove away, her eyes stinging from the smoke and the uncertainty of it all. The fire raged behind them, a monstrous reminder of how quickly life could change. All they could do was keep moving forward, hoping they would return to a place that still existed, hoping that their community would rebuild and rise from the ashes. The fires were far from over, but Mia knew that no matter what happened next, The people of Los Angeles County were more than just survivors, they were fighters, and they would face the flames together, no matter how fierce they became. The last call from Malibu. The sun had barely begun to rise over Malibu when Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another update, another warning. She sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers trembling slightly as she glanced at the screen. The message was clear. The wildfire that had been creeping closer to the coastline for the last few days had now reached critical levels. Evacuation orders in effect for Malibu. Follow CAL FIRE for real-time updates. Her heart sank. The fire was only a few miles away now, and it had been moving fast, fueled by the dry conditions and gusting winds. The news stations had been covering it live since last night. ABC 7, NBC, KTLA 5, each providing updates with their familiar voices. But this was different. This wasn't just another story on TV. This was real. This was happening to her. Sarah had grown up in Malibu, a place where the ocean waves were her lullaby and the scent of salt water and pine trees was always in the air. Now, the smoky haze that clung to the morning sky was a sharp reminder that her childhood sanctuary was under threat. She opened the CAL FIRE website on her phone, refreshing the page as it loaded. The map displayed the growing perimeter of the fire. Red and orange lines crisscrossed across the county, showing the fire's relentless spread. A sudden notification popped up from the local news. Emergency evacuation orders for Malibu and surrounding areas. Local shelters are open. Sarah stood up quickly, pacing across the room. Her thoughts were scattered. What should she pack? Should she leave now, or wait for the official evacuation team? What about her neighbors, her elderly aunt who lived in a nearby apartment? She grabbed her phone again, this time checking Twitter for any real-time updates. The feed was filled with posts tagged with hashtag #CalFire and hashtag Los Angeles Fire. People were sharing their experiences, their fears, and their support for one another. Some posted photos of the flames, others shared evacuation routes, and many offered words of encouragement. One tweet stood out. "Stay safe everyone, the fire is real close to PCH, but CAL FIRE is doing everything they can, don't wait, just leave." It was from a local firefighter, someone she didn't know, but the message was clear. The fire wasn't stopping, and the safest option was to leave. Sarah's stomach tightened. She opened her closet, tossing in essentials, her laptop, a few pieces of clothing, and her grandmother's necklace, something she couldn't leave behind. But just as she was about to grab her keys, another notification popped up. Shelters open at the Malibu Civic Center. Please head there immediately if you are in the evacuation zone. It was official now. She had no choice but to go. She grabbed her phone one more time, dialing her aunt. "Aunt Meg," Sarah's voice shook. "You need to leave now. The fire's too close. Meet me at the shelter." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of her aunt's heavy breathing. "I'm scared, Sarah. What if it's too late?" "We'll be fine, Aunt Meg. Just stay calm and get to the Civic Center. I'll meet you there." With a final glance at the view outside her window, the smoke beginning to swirl like a dark cloud gathering over the ocean, Sarah ran out of her house and into her car. The streets, usually bustling with surfers and tourists, were eerily quiet. The evacuation was already in full swing. She drove past houses with sprinklers still going, through neighborhoods where cars were packed with families leaving their homes behind, and past the fire trucks rushing toward the front lines. The news was reporting live updates, but Sarah didn't need to watch the broadcast anymore. She could feel the intensity of the fire now, the heat in the air even miles away. As she pulled into the shelter parking lot, she could see people gathered in groups, talking in hushed voices, waiting for news. She spotted Aunt Meg near the entrance, looking frail but determined, clutching her purse tightly in one hand and her coat in the other. Sarah rushed to her side and pulled her close. They didn't need to say anything. The uncertainty, the fear, it was all shared in that moment. Sarah took a deep breath, checking her phone one last time. The fire was still spreading, the containment efforts not yet enough to hold it back. But as she watched people come together, helping each other, offering comfort and support, she realized that there was something stronger than the flames. The strength of a community, the ability to face even the fiercest storms together, was something that could never be consumed by fire. In that shelter, among strangers and neighbors alike, Sarah found a moment of calm. The fire outside raged on, but inside, they were united, waiting for the day when they would rebuild. For now, It was enough to be safe, and to hold on to the hope that, despite the destruction, the spirit of Malibu would endure.